for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dubeux from Mariana, another Brazilian on board, and it's good to be here today. How many of you receive requests about post-season forages? I know most of you are from South Florida, and I know perhaps a little less than in North Florida, but a lot of you still raise your hands, so that's good. Those 5 plants right there, they are the backbone of the system. They are really, the warm season. They hold the cattle during the summer. But once you get the first frost, they go dormant. Unless, limpo grass still keeps growing, like I mentioned. And then you need to have a plan. What is the plan for the full season? You can feed the animals with hay, or you can supplement with more concentrate, or you can plant full season forages. So that's what we're going to talk here today. And here in Florida, we do have one of the best conditions to grow full season forages, particularly as you go north, from I-4 north. And even here, we have a good condition. We have a mild winter, and that's one of the greatest places to grow those type of forages. During the warm season, well, that shape might be a little different here and there, depending on where you are in Florida. But we have the warm season forages, and then we have some gaps. Usually May is pretty dry, and we have also the transition from October to December. But then you can fill this gap here in the winter by planting the full season forages. They really have a very high nutritive value, good forage quality, and they really can help to put gains in the cattle. That's a typical Ryegrass cane, and I got that from some of the research done here in Florida. Average gain of this was a 4-year study in Grazing from local. Was a little below pound per day, and you can get on full season at least 2 pounds per day on those forages. So if you put that on top of Ryegrass, you can really increase the annual production by adding the full season forages during the winter, and that really helps. And within the full season, there are different forage options, and you need to be wise and try to identify the best forages. For example, small grains, they are good to give some fall grazing. You have some grazing by Christmas time, if you plant in October. But then it starts to decline like in late February, March, and then if you mix that with ryegrass, that would be a very good option, because they kind of complement each other, the growing season, and extend the whole grazing season, making the most out of that. So the small grains, they grow early in the season. Those are perhaps the most typical ones that you have here in Florida. The cereal rye, the oats, and treated K, those are just different varieties. But there are other options. There are the full season forage recommendation that usually and the forage team puts together, and there are some recommendations there. And the annual grass, typically it comes later into the season, into the full season. So when you mix them together, you complement each other. And then if you add the clovers in the system, you can also reduce your nitrogen fertilization, which is important in different places here in Florida. We have problems in terms of nitrate in the groundwater, and the clovers, they do help reduce the nitrogen fertilization. Although they do fix nitrogen, that nitrogen is slowly released in the environment, different than fertilization. So here is some of the pictures that some of the research that I did in Mariana. One thing that we learned: don't plant ryegrass without fertilizer. That's what you get. But those, they don't also have nitrogen fertilizer, but they do have clovers. That's ryegrass and crimson clover in Mariana, and see how it looks. They're planting at the same time. They had the same amount of fertilizer, but that's where the cloves make the difference. Here's some data for that trial. And really, in Mariana, one of the best combinations is the crimson clover. That's crimson and ryegrass. You see the total dry matter, about 4,000 pounds per acre. And the clover dry matter was actually similar to the Bersin and better than the other ones. But one very interesting thing here in this trial trial that you found in Mariana is that usually when you mix clover with ryegrass, you know, the ryegrass, they don't really benefit, particularly if it's a cutting, a harvesting trial. If it's a grazing trial, it's different because the animals are recycling. They're eating the clover and putting back the nitrogen. But in this case, the ryegrass did benefit somehow from the crimson clover, as you can see here. That's the unfertilized ryegrass, and that's the ryegrass yield with the clover. So somehow the ryegrass was also benefit perhaps from the underground transfer of nitrogen, which is typically not very high.
Dubeux, can I ask you a
Sure.
question? Why the ryegrass production was so low with the percent clover? The 480 pounds.
The unfertilized ryegrass?
No, the one overseeded with the clover. 480.
With
Berseem.
Oh, with the Berseem clover.
Yeah, why it was so much lower than the rest?
Right, that's a good reason, and actually was similar to the other ones. And the only, and you can tell by the picture, the ryegrass was really looking amazing here with the combined with the crimson clover. And I don't know the answer, how that transfer. Somehow it was benefit from the nitrogen fixed from the clover.
Because
And
the
somehow
clover,
maybe mycorrhizal.
the clover production was about the same. The Berseem, is that how they say?
Berseem, yeah.
And crimson were the same, but the ryegrass was dramatically different.
Right, exactly. So the association between crimson and ryegrass somehow benefit more the ryegrass. If you put the nitrogen, the shoot nitrogen, which is the nitrogen above ground, that's why you got the crimson and or ryegrass mix, and just on the unfertilized and or ryegrass. So in summary, in North Florida at least, the crimson clover is really amazing what it can do. But it's an earlier clover, so I also like to mix them. Like you have the concept of the small grains and the ryegrass. If you get an early clover and a mid to late clover and mix them together, you get the most out of the system. So some of the forage options and that, well, before getting to that, I tried to do this decision tree, and you can try to build one as well. I don't know how good this one is. But the first question is, do you need a post-season forage or not? That's the first question. Perhaps some of the producers, they don't. And then, if they don't, you stop right there. But if they do, well, then there are some other questions. Are you grazing or making silage out of that? We have a lot of dairies and also grazing systems. So if you're making silage, so there are some other questions. If it's a dairy, some of the dairies, they need to plant corn by beginning of March or even late February. They need to get the land cleared. So I don't think that dairy benefit a lot if they would put like a ryegrass where it grows late into the season. So I would put, yes, plant small grains, and there are some other options. But if they don't need the land cleared, well, perhaps small grains and ryegrass would be a good combination. And the dairies, particularly the dairies, they have a excess of nutrients in most of the time, so I don't think the clovers would benefit a lot then. Because the post-season grass, they are very good in terms of nutritive values. So if you're grazing, how much nitrogen are you planning to apply? That's another question. If they are applying a lot of nitrogen, I would say, well, go with the small grain and or ryegrass combination. If they're putting less than 80 pounds per acre, for example, for a post-season system, I would say, and those numbers can vary a little bit. It's just an example of the different questions that might come to you as you go to a farm and explore a situation. So yeah, in that case, I would say, well, go ahead and put some clovers. The clovers will benefit the system because you add some nitrogen. And some of the potential questions, we have irrigation, soil drainage, how is that, and soil fertility, the animal type, rainfall. And you kind of put more branches in this tree as you move forward, but I think that's something that you need to keep in mind whenever you're going to a farm and address a situation. So again, there are different skills and inputs required and soil conditions in order to select the plants. In this case, alfalfa is on the top right corner, which requires the best management skills and the best soil condition. So alfalfa is not for everyone, it's not for every system. But yes, it does have a room, but it's not for everyone. And Bahia, I used to say that the Bahia grass has the V, in the flower is the V of victory. Yeah? Johnny said it's Bahia grass and the one that you turn into Bahia grass. And also pH, they are very important in terms of which species are you putting there. Alfalfa is pretty high in terms of pH, usually around 7, that's the recommendation. The clovers are a little less. If in high pH, medics would be a good option. Anyhow, there are some variations there as well. So I'm gonna go a little fast on this recommendation. The oats, well, this is put together in the cool season recommendation list that they can and put that together. But the Horizon 201, the Legend 567 is a rust-resistant variety that is in the market already. And oats is really a good option in terms of small grains. But again, it's good to mix with ryegrass if you're planning to extend the grazing season. In terms of rye, the really early one is Florida 401 rye. And it's really good to give you the Christmas grazing, let's put that way. But it's kind of tricky to manage because it's so early, it puts the heads and the flowers really early as well. And then it gets hard to manage at some point. So it's good to put a little bit in the mixer, but if you only have this rye, you're going to be short in forage like in February or March, because it's really early compared to the others. And there are some other options. In terms of 3TK, there are Tricolor 342 Monarch, and there is a new variety that's not here, the one last 3TK that was just released. And Dr. Blount is here, she can comment on that later. Some of the wheats, I don't really like wheat in terms of recommendation because it usually produces less than the rye and the oats compared to the results that you have. But here in Florida is not very common, but in the Midwest they have some dual-purpose systems that it can be used for the production of grains and forages. And Ryegrass, there is a big list, and usually they produce which one should I plant? Typically, if you see the results of the variety trials, the top 10, they're pretty close to each other. And just pick the, whatever is on the top 10 and see the seed price. That's my recommendation. If the seed is twice as much as the other one, which is very close in terms of yield, I would say that it's not worth the price. In terms of white clover, red clover, those are the ones. Ocoa is high in the list because it's nematode resistant and it's pretty good for flatwood soils. And again, it's good to have a mixture of them. Usually I like the mixture of crimson, red, and ball, which is like early, mid to late season. And they work really well, at least in North Florida. And those are the recommended varieties. That's on I-10 in Jackson County, Florida. So you see crimson clover all over the place on I-10. I think the DOT, they planted those, but that also shows that it goes well in a harsh environment. And these data shows that the mixtures, usually they work better. For example, this is a two-season grass, crimson, red, and ball. And the two-season grass was a rye and ryegrass mix. And if you compare that with, just two-season grass and hairy veg, for example, just two-season grass and ball clover, this one is, well, it's a bit better, at least from this bottom ones here. And it's just because you use more efficient the nutrient resources as you have different growing patterns and rooting depths and timing along the season. At the end, you produce more biomass. And a lot of research is doing that as you increase a little bit the species diversity and species richness and with different functional groups like grass and legumes, for example, they tend to increase the primary productivity. That's in Mariana, Florida, the crimson, red, and ball clover mixture that I had last year. But there is one trick question here, one trick thing. You don't, as the spring comes, you don't really want a thick clover stand on top of the Bahia grass or on top of the perennial peanut. That really can hurt the regrowth. I got some producers coming, and a lot of them have problems with their Bahia grass stand because they have either thick clovers or thick, ryegrass on top of that. So we need to be careful on that management. That's another farm in the Faniac Springs in North Florida, and that's Southern Bell, red clover and oats. That's a stalker system. That's very interesting system. Some of the options of clovers, the arrowleaf, ball clover, and Versine. I highlight here the ball clover is one of the best reseeders in terms of producing natural reseeding. It's one of, at least in Mariana, it's one of the best. We did a trial with putting 2, 4, or 6 pounds of ball clover And that's what I got, the unfertilized ryegrass, and again, the bulk clover and the ryegrass, that's a big difference. And by the way, 3 to 4 pounds is usually what we recommend. And then, talking a little bit about alfalfa, I don't know if Dr. Patricia Munoz is coming in the afternoon, maybe, I'm not sure, he's not coming. But he's the new alfalfa breeder at UF, so I'll say that right now we only have the Bulldog 805 as a recommended variety, but hopefully soon we'll have some new varieties coming in the pipeline. That's some data from Patricia in Citra. And one interesting thing here is that the grass plus nitrogen produce 9,200 pounds per acre, and the Florida 99 plus the Bermuda grass, which is a mix, that's a T35 and alfalfa mix, produce almost that amount without the nitrogen fertilizer. So that's an interesting system. But again, alfalfa is not for everyone. It needs a high pH, a very demanding crops in terms of nutrients, and you need to be careful. And the percentage of alfalfa in that mix was around 66%. That's in High Springs, Florida. That's Bulldog 805 being grazed. That's some on-farm data that you collect in Mariana in Jackson County. And that's the average yield of different varieties. And that's the cumulative yield per year. So we got, that's irrigated with high nutrient input type of alfalfa field. And that's what we got, around 4,000 pounds per acre. That's blue corn. That's the only alfalfa producer that we have in Jackson County. So under irrigation, in our experience in North Florida, at least, from the on-farm data, we get 13 to 14,000 pounds per acre, with 7 to 8 harvests. I know that Patricia has been harvesting more times during the year here in South Florida, near Gainesville, maybe 10 times per year, something like that. But under rain-fed condition, it's significantly lower, maybe 5 to 7,000 pounds in 4 to 5 harvests in our tribe. And the only one that I can really recommend by now, well, Florida 99 is a great alfalfa, but it's not in the market. So Bulldog 805 is the only one. That's after 2 years of trial in Mariana, and you see the voids of the different alfalfas that you tried. And really the best ones were the Bulldog 805 and Florida 99 after 2 years. The other ones were not really persistent. So that's the reason that we're recommending. And because 99 is not in the market, so Bulldog is the one that. And you're trying black oats as a new option, as a full season forage. We're going to plant some trial next week, so I'll be here next week again, Joe, to plant some black oats. And the idea here is to plant a little bit earlier, because usually our window for recommendation is October to November, October 15 to November 15. So if you can plant something by the first week of September, then you can have forage by the end of October. And that will be important, particularly for the dairies and some of the systems that we have.
Are those commercially available?
Some of them are, but you don't know the response yet. You don't know how is the early plant gonna be in terms of disease pressure and all that. So that's something that we're looking at.
I couldn't find them last year.
Talk about something about establishment. So usually October to November 15 is usually the best window. And there are different options, progressive bed, no-till drill, and it really depends on the system. But here in South Florida, I understand that sometimes the first frost might come very late, and that reduces the grazing season, or the growing season for the full season forages. So one option, and I put here, if the producer is having like a pasture renovation program, the full season forages could be incorporated to that, and then it could be planted a little earlier, like the regular window. Perhaps here in South Florida will be a little late at the later portion of that window, and that would be an interesting option to integrate in the pasture renovation program, and you would avoid the risk to plant too late. So grain drill, broadcast, no-till drill, those are the different options that you can use. And some of the pictures showing the overseeding on Rye Grass perennial peanut pasture that we had in Mariana last fall. We had to wait for the first frost, and then we overseeded on top of Rye and perennial peanut pastures. And that's interesting. You see the waves here. That's where the perennial peanut was, and where the Rye was. So we see some waves on the strips of those pastures. And yes, the clover, they do get thick by late March, beginning of April, and that's when the Ryegrass and the perennial peanut is coming. So you need to graze down that clover by late March, early April, and let the Ryegrass and perennial peanut to come up. And at some point you have a diversity of forages here. As you can see, you have perennial peanut and crimson clover and cool season grass, and also Ryegrass, everything at the same time, because that's the transition. And you need to be careful in this transition, because the warm season forages, they're coming up, and the cool season are still there, and you don't want to have a big stand of the cool season. In terms of animal performance, we did a 2-year trial comparing those different mix, Ryegrass, oat and Ryegrass, and triticale and Ryegrass. And in terms of average daily gain was around 2 pounds per day for the oat. The Rye and Ryegrass was a little less, 1.5 in this case, and triticale 1.8. The stocking rate around 1.5 steers per acre during 112 days. And the gain per area in terms of pounds per acre was around 300 pounds. So that's pretty good in terms of gain per area in the cool season forages. And probably, I mean, Chris can help on the economics, and that's what really the producer needs to do, to put together, what if I fed, poor quality hay? I would be spending money without putting gain in the animals. So those are the options that we have. And this is just one of the oat and Ryegrass. As you can see here, the participation in the botanical composition, that's the oat and the Ryegrass. And so that's why it's good to mix them whenever we have the different evaluations. As you progress towards the season, we decrease the participation of the small grain and increase the annual Ryegrass. I just have 3 more, Joe. I'm getting there. That's fresh from the oven. That's 2016 data from Mariana. Basically, we compared 3 different systems. You saw that we had like the Ryegrass and peanut and perennial peanut during the warm season. We have the also fertilized Ryegrass and unfertilized Ryegrass. So we overseed all those 3 pastures with cool season forages. And on the blue line, you see the Ryegrass plus 112 kilograms, which is 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen. And then we have the other system, which are similar in terms of their mixture. They are just different on whatever they had during the summer. But during the winter, they are a mix of, in this case, rye oats and 3 clovers, crimson, red clover, and gold clover. And we only put 30 pounds in this case, in this system, compared to 100 pounds in the other system. And what you can see is a difference in terms of the timing. At the beginning, the average daily gain is greater for the fertilized system. But then when the grass starts to decline, then the clovers come late into the season and then increase the gain of the animals. At the end, we did not have it at the whole season. The average was 1.8 pounds per head per day, and was similar among the system. Similar here for stocking rate, a greater stocking rate for the fertilized system earlier, like in March, April, but then late March and late April, we went up to May here, May 13 in this case, and then the clovers came and then really helped the system. And at the end, the average stocking rate was the same. And same for the gain per area. We are able to produce in this system 367 pounds, 370 pounds of body weight per acre from January to May. And then here, these animals, they got into this pasture in January 8th, and they're still there. They'll be there until October. But now we have the warm season pasture, and they just stay there, and you're measuring now the summer portion. Some of the take-home messages, the cool season forage, they really offer a great opportunity to improve the livestock nutrition during flood. And again, we have an excellent environment to grow those forages. The grass lagging mixtures, they might be an option to reduce the nitrogen from fertilizer. At the end, in those systems, you produce the same amount of livestock products per unit of area, putting less fertilizer. And the forage options, they are really numerous and site-specific, and you should be in contact with So if specialists or county agent to decide on what's the best option. And here for South Florida, I really think that the pasture renovation program could be coupled to cool season forages, and that's a way to be able to put them on the ground earlier in the season. That's all I have.
When you go through questions, yeah, you can go through questions, and now we'll pass along the evaluation.
What are your seeding rates? What are you reducing them by when you're mixing your rye and your ryegrass together?
In our trial, for example, rye and ryegrass, we use 70 pounds of rye and 15 pounds of ryegrass. For triticale, we use 85, and that's because the seed size they are different. So we use 85 and 15. For triticale and oats, they are about the same size, so that's what we use. When you mix with the clovers, it was a little different. So we put 50 pounds of. We didn't plant ryegrass in this system, on the perennial peanut system, because it was the first year of establishment of perennial peanut, and really didn't want. I mean, there were some concerns in terms of the ryegrass hurting the peanuts, so we didn't plant that. So we put just rye and oats, 50 pounds each, plus the clovers. In this case, whenever we're doing mixtures, we need to reduce the rates. So for the clovers, use 15, 6, and 3 for crimson, red, and ball clovers. And it worked well. And I think that we can still reduce a little bit those numbers and save some on the seed. Still do a good job.
Jose, on your first chart of unfertilized ryegrass, you got 850 pounds. And then you had unfertilized cool season grass.
That's a different trial.
Yes, it's a different trial, but I was just comparing like the yields.
Okay.
Like, what did you do differently on the second trial because you got 3,022 pounds
Right.
of unfertilized cool season grasses?
In this unfertilized cool season grass, we had actually two mixtures. One was rye and ryegrass, and the other one was ryegrass. They were not really different in that trial, and I think the rye will kind of push the average.
The yield. Okay. I was just saying because unfertilized and you got 3,000 pounds.
Right. Yeah, the rye probably helped on that.
Yeah. It's very impressive.